Night School. My name is Leah Prime, and I'll be your host tonight, facilitating conversation with the other faculty members. So the Invisible Night School is a small consortium of lay researchers and scholars analytically exploring UFOs, UAPs, high strangeness, and the cultural and social implications of the phenomenon. You can find us at theinvisiblenightschool.com. We also have a public Discord, which is linked in the video description. We'd love if you'd come join us. So, without any further delay, let's welcome the other faculty members. We have Nick Coffin-Collis, Luis Cayetano, and Campbell Morera.
Hi.
All right, looks like we're having an issue with Nick here. Nick, I'm going to remove you real quick and then re-add you to the stream. Nick, we can't see you, bud, but can we hear you?
Hello?
Oh, we can hear him.
Yeah, we can hear him.
I can see myself. That's odd.
We can hear you. Yeah, go ahead and reset things. Yeah. This is our premiere live stream, so we're kind of building this plane as we're flying it, and I definitely expect that there's going to be a little bit of a learning curve for all of this.
Am I here yet?
We can still hear you, but cannot see you. It may have to do with the background that you're trying to use or something like that. All right, we'll let him rejoin. So while we wait for Nick to come back, good evening, Luis, Campbell. Oh, and here we go. Here's Nick. Nick, welcome back.
Oh, it's working.
It works.
Yeah,
okay.
We see you now.
Perfect.
Fantastic. So, good evening. And where shall we begin tonight? There's been a lot going on.
Well, UFO Twitter is always a good place to start.
Yeah.
It really is the hub.
I think before this Calvine photo was released, everybody was up in arms about Mick West retweeting Gideon's article about aerial school.
Yes.
That was pretty interesting. He proposed a traveling puppet troupe, I think, that they may have seen. Did anybody see that or actually see the reactionary outrage to Mick tweeting that?
The response was incredible because it felt like people were incapable of understanding that he wasn't endorsing this idea, but he was really making a larger point about probabilities of reality, right? He's not saying, oh, it's definitely a puppet show. He's saying that in the scheme of probability here, that is a more likely encounter to have than, actual UFOs or aliens. And it feels like that ultra knee-jerk response to it was just a complete failure to absorb, accept the nuance of what he was saying. Like, this isn't super abstract. It didn't strike me as super abstract.
That tweet was kind of a reading comprehension test, it seemed like to me. Sorry. I'm not going to throw shade right away. But, it was an interesting idea. And we're seeing like a lot of ideas come out right now that the Calvine photos dropped too. And I think people should realize that, we're exploring different options. These are unresolved cases, right? So why not have an open mind, as they often proclaim, and take a look at all options? I don't necessarily think that those kids saw I don't think they saw anything out of the ordinary, really, personally. And I'm not a big proponent of that case either, though. Did you guys see that?
Yeah, I saw that. And I agree entirely with what you said, Leah. Like, I think that it was entirely like Mick trying to present somebody else's point that almost anything's more likely than aliens, and it's just a fact. And so, like, I think that there's a problem where there's a legitimate hypothesis that is non-human intelligence. That's a viable hypothesis, and that should be considered. But there's an issue where when it gets countered, there's an emotional response instead of actually just bringing the facts and supporting the argument. And I think that really was emphasized in the emotional reaction in the community.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, for me, what it brings up is sort of going back to conversations we've had about standards of evidence, right? Like, this is an enormous subject, and when you think about what demonstrates proof or what doesn't demonstrate proof, to me, it feels like there should be evidence that is effectively airtight, right? Like it shouldn't be evidence that is constantly or continually footnoted with circumstances or blurry pictures or eyewitness reports from people that maybe don't have the best reputation. Instead, like you want something that's going to be airtight, and I feel like to accept anything less than that is to fail to give the subject the respect, both intellectually and culturally, that it deserves.
Yeah, I see a lot of reactions where they seem to be coming from the point where ET is the default, kind of a reverse burden of proof situation happening. It's really strange to me.
It reminds me of the God of the Gaps stuff
Mhm.
and like the new atheist movement that you used to hear, that like any phenomenon that you couldn't directly attribute to science or measurement, you automatically had to assume that it was God. And I think that's one of the more troubling things I see in this community, right? Is that like there's gaps in our scientific understanding and our experience in the world, and to just kind of like spackle in all those spaces with, oh, it's got to be UFOs, it's got to be aliens, feels like a really intellectually lazy and disingenuous approach to something that's, you know, naturally very complex.
It's kind of interesting to me because we have all these like kind of realms of the unknown and fear. So we have like outer space, the bottom of the ocean, the middle of the jungles, and death.
Mm-hmm.
And all these things are just envoys of that, right? We have ghosts, the envoys of death, and we have aliens coming down from space, and they all kind of originate from these like centers of fear of the unknown, right? And we've kind of personified them like humans do. You know, you put a face, you put a personality to things, like even pets or even inanimate things. You know, we all have that tendency to see faces in the front of cars and just personify everything. People talking to their cats and expecting them to behave in certain ways, when that's not another human. They're not like us, but we project that onto them. And I kind of see all of Fringe kind of doing that with our unknowns
and with consciousness.
Yeah, true. Anything we don't understand, we kind of create a little man that comes out of it.
Yeah. Louise, have you studied the Ariel School case?
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on it overall?
I think it's a very interesting psychosocial event. Definitely don't think there was an alien involved or anything like that, but I think it's still very interesting because you still have to explain, like, how do you get that many people, you know, having an experience, a shared experience. And I think there's a lot there to potentially learn about how groups, like how experiences maybe are triggered in other people if you're part of a group. Like, I mean, we already kind of know that from, well, you know, like Nazi Germany, there were all these gigantic rallies where people reported feeling like they were part of a whole, right? And so those sorts of things where you've got like a lot of people involved, people assume that just because there's different individuals involved, that therefore there had to be some extraneous, you know, extraordinary event, but there really didn't have to be.
The thing with groups too is, you know, how you guys know how stage hypnosis works. It kind of plays on both the aspect of like the desire to acclimate plus the people pleasing tendencies people naturally have. And I feel like that, especially with little kids, is gonna, and not to mention the time that took place between all their questioning. I feel like they getting together in groups and going along with a narrative, and that narrative becomes finer and finer. Not to mention when you add in the basically interrogation of the kids eventually, where they were asked to presume the intentions of the alien at that point. I like that narrative was just formed, you know what I mean? By like a multitude of factors, I think, but it really, I don't know, you take I posted that story, my 6th grade camping story, on my Twitter recently.
Yes.
I keep laughing at that thread too.
Yeah, that was so funny.
It's really problematic looking back on it. This was 1993, 1994.
Sure.
Yeah, everybody believed that. But I mean, that was pretty up close and stuff like that. And we all talked about it. You know, we went back to the big rooms and stuff like that, and we were sleeping overnight, and we were all talking about it, and it just grew and grew and grew. And that was, you know, a small little event, and we weren't, you know, interviewed or interrogated after it. I can only imagine what those kids would have said. My classmates would have said if they were interviewed on the news or by a ufologist afterwards. You know what I mean? So I think,
Mhm.
I think there's a lot of factors pulling those kids and pulling that narrative to fit certain molds out of those kids over the, I think it took place over months when they were being re-questioned, re-filmed and all that stuff.
I mean, right, it really draws upon really how human beings create, like, build collaboratively and collectively world build,
Yeah.
and create myths and shared realities between
Mhm.
themselves, especially when encountering something that may be outside the normal quotidian experience, right?
Mhm.
Um, and I think when we talk about the Ariel school, there's also this, I don't want to call it social coercion exactly, but once you've sort of bought into this shared vision, going against that grain, like that's in a lot of ways, especially for these adults now who went through this, that's an ego destroying experience. That's an essential part of their identity that was formed during, probably the most neuroplastic period of their lives. And it's been an essential part of their identity as they grow. And like this goes back it almost reminds me of like arguments about like Bob Lazar or you know Serpo or anything
Mhm.
where you have this really you have this blending of truth and real where at a certain point like what actually happened is almost immaterial because it winds up so woven into this grand mythology that is sort of collectively imagined by the community or by experiencers. And frequently, like that experience, it flies in the face of sort of, I would say, like material reality or the phenomenological world.
Well, that's something that I've picked up on. And when I first started taking a look at UFO cases, I was talking to experiencers and believers through Reddit, on Twitter, and stuff. And I was honestly quite ultimately disappointed to see the difference when somebody would like explain the aerial case to me, like one on one. And it would sound so incredible, be like hundreds of kids, this and that. And then I would look into the details, and it's like, MUFON director Cynthia Hine went like 2 days later. There had been a satellite reentry or whatever the previous days. It was in the news that alien stuff was in the news. These were mostly like diplomats' children and like wealthy people. There was like a tennis court and all this stuff. And like when the facts are getting like changed to support it, and then when you go in and you actually look at it and you're like trying to talk to the person, being like, well, this is says like quite definitively it's different than what you just said, and then it's like I'm like offending the experiencers by like just trying to get at what actually happened. And that's part of it that like I'm disappointed by that whole aspect of this, because I think the cases are really cool and I would love to actually like dig into the details, but
For
often
sure.
I find that's very challenging, like from an
Yeah.
emotional side of things, right?
Underlying symbolic truth of the case might be more important than the literal truth.
Exactly.
So Halperin and others have written about how the kids might have been seeing something which was, well, I mean, there's like an ecological message that the supposed aliens were transmitting to the children and stuff like that. The ways of relating to the world, which are often embodied or like encoded in the UFO experience, and that's more interesting, I think, than even if it was aliens.
Mhm.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, I mean, I think, look, what we're kind of talking about is, in religion, what you'd call redaction, right? Like this process of sort of transmuting the nuance of experience into whatever the prevailing cultural or theological or social frameworks exist at the time. And I think that, given the time, like the literal chronological time of the aerial experience, it makes sense that it would be passed through, things or concerns around like ecology. I
Mhm.
also think too about, at the end of the day, our brains and our memories aren't very good at discerning between consumed media or like implanted memories, quote unquote,
Mhm.
and direct lived experience. And so I think there's also something to be said for going through the process of working with Mac, talking to other students, going through sort of the media barrage, that this in and of itself creates an internal truth or frame of reference for those kids and for the adults that sort of transmutes into the UFO thesis or the alien extraterrestrial thesis.
If I'm not wrong, I think Hind in her book was trying to make the claim that these kids were kind of isolated from the kind of the zeitgeist idea concept of UFOs, but that wasn't true at all, is my understanding. but yeah, I think she made direct claims that like these kids have never heard of flying saucers or UFOs. They don't have access to TV and
That's
movies.
Bullshit.
that's like such a Western idea
Mhm.
too about what Africa must be like,
Oh, yeah.
right? Like oh, it's
Yeah.
it's people living out in the bush without running water or electricity. But the reality is that they were in a pretty, my understanding, a fairly affluent, well-educated area, and certainly would have had access to Western media and resources. Like that's not even a question.
Not to mention the UFO mania that just started the day before. Like I think a lot of people called in that Russian. What was it, Campbell? What was?
I thought it was a satellite re-entry event. It may have just been a meteor as well. I can't recall. Or was it a booster potentially?
Yeah.
coming in? Yeah.
Regardless, whatever the re-entry event was, it did spawn like a flurry of UFO sightings, and I'm assuming a lot of accompanying news footage and media and stuff like that. So it was on people's minds that next day. I think there's actually 2 or 3 girls that were talking about how they saw a UFO the day before, and the one girl who's being interviewed thought it was a plane at first, but her friends said no, it's a UFO, and she said, oh, okay, it's a UFO, and kind of went along with it, which kind of is like a smaller version of what I think happened.
Well, that's very interesting too, especially in reference to something like the Nimitz event, where Steve Long made that post a while ago about how Alex Dietrich originally thought it was a missile, and it was only after talking to Fravor back at base, who was her commanding officer and the leader of like one of the most preeminent squadrons in the Navy, said like, oh no, I saw it different, and then it sort of changed. So like those in-group type factors where if like your brain adaptively prioritizes maintaining social connections over information content a lot of the time, and like a lot of these things are perfect examples of that.
One more thing about the aerial, if I may, is that, and Halperin mentions this as well in his article, that was a time in Zimbabwe when there was increasing political and racial strife, and the UFO experience, it was witnessed by white and also black and other children, so it was like a racial mix. So it might have been like a way of unifying the children in anticipation of like increasing political division.
Interesting.
Oh, that's really interesting, because you really see it in parallels now, right? Where you hear UFOs and UAPs being described as sort of the last frontier of bipartisan issues, that it's non-political, which is
that's so.
It resonates in 2022.
Yeah.
Yeah. Speaking of UFOs being apolitical, I noticed that there's, I think, 2 more specials coming out on Fox News or Fox Nation, I believe, covering cattle mutilation. Tucker Carlson.
I saw that ad. Yeah.
Cattle mutilation. So that'll be interesting. Anybody watch it?
I saw the ad on. I honestly, I'm a progressive, but I actually read Fox News regularly to sort of see what's going on. And I've been seeing the ads on Fox News over and over, and it's like thousands of mutilated bodies, fully disemboweled. It's one of these things again where it's like, I wish that it would just get down to the pure reality of it, because I feel that they weaken their own cases often by expanding it beyond the reality of it, like I was describing with Ariel. And it's like, just give the basic facts and like, let's get into it. Like if it's like Gary Nolan on Lex Friedman's show said that Ariel School is, in his view, the strongest evidence that, UFOs are something extraordinary. And he then presented a synopsis of the case that is sort of consistent with what I was describing earlier, where it's like, I can't remember the exact wording, but it was like hundreds of kids saw this thing, that this happened, and they all saw the same type of thing. And it's like, that's not how it went down. Let's just be consistent with the reality of it.
I'm confused as to how he could claim that is evidence of anything. It's still just kids telling a story. Like, how do you falsify that in any way?
He says in the interview, kids don't lie like that. And that struck me as such a strange statement, because he's such an intelligent man.
Children? Like,
well, that's a great question.
Kids lie all the time. I have a kid. She lies constantly.
I used to lie all the time when I was a kid.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's normal, right?
Right.
I thought that was just what kids do.
Or maybe we're just an incredible quartet of degenerates here, from birth, deceiving everyone around us.
Only skeptics grow up like.
Well, I hear that claim, or I used to hear that claim a lot in the in the ghost hunting community too, because you get a lot of cases where the kid sees something in the corner that the parents can't see, and children are more in tune with things, like they often say animals are too. No, that's not the case. Kids make crap up, they imagine things.
Yeah, they're exploring reality, like trying to discern what they can get away with, what is real, what isn't. Like, yeah, it's normal.
Yeah, they're in the process of world building, right? Like building out the mental models for how they interpret reality. And also, I mean, honestly, like it's not until you're pretty progressed that you even have a sense that other people experience reality. I mean, candidly, like some people never really ever reach that point. But in theory, you're supposed to reach that point sometime around adolescence, rather than assuming you're the only person who has a depth and sophistication of consciousness. Everybody does.
Well, if it happens when you base everything solely on like your own input. That's why that comment I always make to people, like, if you judge everything by like, I know what I saw and my own personal experiences, you'll end up thinking the world is flat because you don't have that common consensus that you're drawing on, It's not, it's a good tool, your observations, but be open.
Right. Yeah. It comes to that, having a well-honed or robust meta model for how you understand and interpret the limits of your own knowledge, and at what point you actually start deferring to additional expertise to supplant your basically your thinking for you, right? And how people do this. And I think, look, I mean, like, personal feelings about Gary Nolan aside, like, we see this in action where there's this assumption that because he possesses particular academic credentials, works in particular areas, that his expertise, and let me be very clear, his expertise in his field of study is exemplary. It's really incredible. I'm not throwing shade here, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it transfers to other things, and I think having a strong understanding of the limits of your own knowledge and being very honest about those limits is an essential part of being both a responsible thinker and a responsible researcher in any sense.
Absolutely. Like, what do you guys make of like Dr. Nolan's relationship long term with this whole crew? Because he seems to be like embedded with like knows Put Off, knows Valet and all that stuff. Like, does anybody know his backstory?
Not me.
So I'm taking a class right now with Dr. Diana Pasulka out of UNC, I think Wilmington. And Dr. Nolan was a guest in one of the early classes. And it was a really great conversation. It was a very technical conversation because he responded to questions from students in the class, and the students had clearly done their homework. But he made a very off-the-cuff comment at one point where he was discussing psychedelics, and he said something, and I'm paraphrasing here, but he said something like, look, I'm 61, I've never done psychedelics, but if I'm going to, I need to do it soon before circumstances changed. And there was some subtext there that, like, he's looking at or maybe getting in bed with some of the federal work, right? Because that would definitely preclude you from, any sort of psychonautic adventures. But yeah, I mean, he's totally built into this fabric of the preeminent thinkers in this space, for real. And he's also one of these emerging figures, like Valet, ushered in, I think, sort of the contemporary model or image of what a scholar is in this space. But Jacques Vallée is, he's older, and the torch will be passed to subsequent academics and scholars. And I think Gary Nolan and Dr. Pasulka, like, these are figures that are going to emerge as sort of the intellectual, I think, front runners in this industry, in this space. It's kind of an industry, but definitely in this space.
This could, I'm not too clear on his connections or backstory. I know when he was on Tucker Carlson, he told a story where he mentioned the CIA approached him with medical cases, and I believe he's referring to Kit Green in that instance, right? And if those are the medical cases that came out in the DIRDs, what was that, like 6 months ago, when all the headlines were running UFOs injure people, Pentagon study shows, those were really unimpressive from my recollection, and certainly didn't establish any kind of like causal link between any kind of close encounter and these symptoms. So I'm wondering if that's what he's referring to, or these are different cases. Again, like with all these big claimers and these kind of like figures in ufology, it's all a lot of talk about evidence, but you never see it. So I don't.
Nolan or Kit Green, who, like, when they were pushed by Jack Brewer, they kind of basically said, oh, this isn't really evidence for otherworldly activity.
Yeah, I think that was Kit Green. He also his current take, at least I think, is that all of those cases in that dirt were from man-made technology. I think he like kind of inferring that it was Havana syndrome, which is another kind of dubious claim. You know, so it's like one for the other. But again, when you have these like brain scans, as Nolan was talking about. I don't know if he was just trying to be like illustrative with that. You have these symptoms. How are you making that connection? You know, you have claims, of course, and maybe you're testing it against those claims. I don't know. Where's the causal link between like something out of the ordinary and these symptoms? Are they unique in some way? I don't know. I don't know if we'll ever see it either.
There's also an issue about sample size, because these cases are relatively rare, but to get a good statistical inference about something, you need sufficient sample size, or else you can easily get a spurious result.
That comment.
Yeah, well, and I mean, also just even if we're not going to get into statistical significance, even just having a robust framework to sort of standardize and formalize the study of this subject feels really important, right? Because if we are having these events occur, but we don't have, there's basically not a formalized, or I would say scientifically standardized way to approach research, it doesn't matter how good, quote unquote, the events are for demonstrating truth or validity, right? Like how many times does something like the aerial phenomenon have to happen before we eventually have standards of evidence or investigation that satisfies any kind of standard of research?
Don't look at me. I'm no scientist.
Yeah, well, you're just some dubious layman. It's real weird.
Amazing title, by the way. But there is like published peer-reviewed papers about mass kind of like experiences at, I remember there was one that's been published about a school event also like in Africa, where dozens of the children start like vomiting and stuff, and that ended up being seen as psychosomatic, and it's been studied in depth. And Dr. Oberg from NASA did that major thing with a couple hundred people seeing a satellite reentry event over Hawaii, and then half of them reported seeing a structured craft. So like these things are like being studied, and I see that they are almost never brought up in the community. And I wish that there would be some intrinsic motivation to whittle out the like junk from the actual gold, right? Why is it not within the community? If this is the most important subject ever, if aliens are here, like that's what I want. Like I want to know that sincerely. Right. And sometimes I get the sense that that's not, like it's almost like you don't want to look close enough because you don't want to resolve the image, and it's just
I just saw someone kind of experiencing that on Twitter just a moment ago, involving the photograph from the Belgian wave, the triangle lights.
Yes.
Hoaxed. I don't think he was familiar with the person who confessed that they hoaxed it, and I ended up sharing the link with him, and he was really dubious of it, which was, I mean, it was good. He's like, well, where are the sources? Where are pictures of this and stuff like that? And then he ended up finding them, and he's like, well, it looks like that's the nail in the coffin, unfortunately. Which one, that photo doesn't speak to the whole case. I mean, there's a lot more going on with that. But no, I don't agree that it's unfortunate at all. Like why would I want to continue believing that if that was false, right?
Well, and I mean, I think there's lots of compelling arguments to say expanding or exploring ways the scientific method can flex or frame these events. That that there's mysterious things that the human mind does, qualia or somatic experiences that are currently outside the realm of our capability of measurement or understanding. Like you can fully understand and accept, and I think it's important to accept that there are mysteries that we encounter as humans all the time. But that doesn't necessarily mean they're attributable to aliens. full stop, or any sort of extraterrestrial hypothesis, like, to me, it almost speaks to like a limitation of imagination, right? When
Mhm.
you think about potential outcomes, like it seems so self-limiting. And instead, I'm all about sort of being respectful to the power of the mind and the intellect. And I think one of the most respectful things you can basically do is say, okay, there's huge swaths, there's huge dark spots in human knowledge.
Mhm.
And to do respect to those dark areas, rather than filling it in with cultural or social debris. Instead, we have to accept that there are those mysteries that are sort of elusive or evasive of human understanding as yet, right? And there also may be things that, frankly, we're never going to be able to understand completely, based on limitations of our senses, our abilities
Yeah,
to actually measure and understand data. And to me, being open to that sort of wonder and like the numinous is really essential.
indeed. This kind of reminds me of, and we talked about it at the top, kind of the ideas that are getting thrown out about the new Calvine photo, and the reaction to those ideas. And I see a lot of, I want to use the word since it's so familiar, stigma towards
Hmm.
people offering up non-alien or non-US black tech explanations. Um, I I kind of like the reflection idea. It seems plausible to me. The kite a little less much, and then the banner. I don't necessarily buy the advertising banner, just because that, I know it's really blurry and only a couple pixels, but that plane does look like it's either a Harrier or a similar plane that they actually did have in that area at the time. It was called like a Hawk. I'll have to look that up. Maybe I'll look that up before the next show.
Hmm.
But I don't think they would be towing a banner, so maybe shoot that one. But well, like that isn't saying anything against the person who put that idea out there. It was really good, and they provided a good example video that I noticed earlier on today. But
Yeah, the banner video, like that wouldn't make any sense for a banner plane to be in that area at that time, but it's more likely than extraterrestrial vehicle, obviously, right?
Well,
And the banner video on, I think it's the top comment under Mick West's kite thing. It's the video of the plane with the banner. It looks identical.
it does.
It blew my mind seeing that. I was like, that is the Calvine photo. What the heck?
I will
Oh
say,
man, I need to see this video.
it
Yeah,
doesn't.
actually, let's play it. Yeah.
You said it wouldn't make sense for it to be in that area, but to be honest, we don't know where that picture was taken.
Yeah, that's also true. It was
Right.
anonymous hikers. It's so wild. I'd love to get into that, I
We
guess,
don't
in the
even
next
know
hour.
if
Yeah.
the photo released is their photo. To be
Yeah,
fair.
that's true.
And there's a couple of reasons to question that. One is Nick Pope's constant talking about it. He always mentions you can see the landscape in the background, but further still, and it was in the Sun article, I think in 2020, he mentions that the experts at the MOD who looked at it were able to judge its size by measuring the background in the landscape. Now that's not in this photo at all. It's completely white. So is this the same photo even? I don't know. I mean, there's a lot of questions as to the origins of this photo and the origins of the story itself. So what we're left, I think, at the end of the day, or at least my opinion, is it's just an ambiguous photo. It looks cool. I'll give it that. But that's the best that's the best praise I have for it. Certainly not proof of anything.
There's so much quantitative information I want before I even start thinking about if I think this is legit. And
Sure.
I bring this up, like, in a perfect world, this would have been taken on an iPhone, so there's all sort of GIS metadata, right? But yeah,
Right.
like when we're talking about analog cameras used by an amateur, like we don't know actually where this was taken. They can tell us it was taken anywhere, and you just have to assume. We also don't know anything about the people who actually took the photos. And I think having them come forward, like I hate to be the person to say this, but I want to know more about them. I want to know,
Yeah.
from the perspective of a character witness, what are these people like? What sort of intentions or objectives would there be? I would want sort of more, I guess, social context before even starting to approach what do I actually think this is a photo of.
Right. So there's a little bit of speculation, but I think what was known is they worked at a hotel. They were both chefs at a hotel.
That's Dr. David Clark's work. Yes, he's.
Yes, I
Yeah.
recommend
Right.
looking at that. They went on, I think they claimed they drove 13 miles and then went on another walk after a long day of work.
At 9 p.m.
There's some, yeah, which is odd, but whatever, to each their own. There was some rumors about they may have been poachers. So maybe that odd behavior kind of lends itself to that. I don't know. And then there's a little bit of discrepancy on whether they heard a sound or not. Some accounts say that they heard a hum, while others say that there was no sound.
Yeah.
Gosh, what else? There's so little known about this, and including how David Clark met the guy who gave him the picture. What was his name?
I mean, it's kind of a. I'm sorry, what was his name?
Craig Lindsay is the.
Okay.
He was a former press officer, I think, for the MOD, and he's the guy who stashed a print.
Yeah, stole it. Yeah.
Oh, right, in his like Aircrafts of the World coffee table book, and he was just waiting 30 plus years for someone to come ask him for it, which is also mind blowing in and of itself, right? That he wasn't holding on to this and then trying to, I don't know, distribute it someplace or share it with other people.
Right, but I mean, all the information that came from him was known information. You know, he said the story where they turned it into that newspaper, and then the newspaper turned it into the MOD, and then he talked about going into the MOD office and seeing it up on the wall, which has been known since 1996 from Nick Pope's book, Open Skies, Closed Minds, which is an awesome title.
Yeah, that's pretty good.
So it is all known information. So he could have just been aware of this story and recreated this. It sounds like I'm accusing the guy. We just don't know, though. I'm illustrating that we don't know. We have so little information on a photo that really doesn't. I mean, it looks odd, but it doesn't look like anything. I know people are trying to use AI to upscale it, and it's just really.
Well, it's like enhance, right? Like enhance. It's like there's nothing there.
Yeah. Well, and also like it's another perfect example of like the common man's misunderstanding of what AI can do, right? Computer vision is fairly powerful, but it's not going to interpolate from like an analog high loss or high latency image like what was actually going on here. It's not going to read the Akashic fields, right? And that's what it sort of feels like people are trying to do.
We also actually don't know if negatives were provided to either the newspaper or to the MOD.
Sure.
We don't know why that newspaper didn't publish it. There's a rumor that there was what's it called, a D notice, I think.
Dr. Clark, actually, I was reading about this earlier today. I can get into it. Dr. Clark was saying, it's a very interesting coincidence where the lead editor of the newspaper, the Daily Record, I believe, right? It's the evening newspaper, like a high standing newspaper, but the main editor was on vacation at the time the photos were received. And so they went to the photo editor, and apparently for unknown reasons, the photo editor did not tell anybody else that the photos had been received by the newspaper and sent them immediately to the Ministry of Defense. And something quite interesting is that the lead editor, Dr. Clark, found out that the lead editor on that newspaper was on the board responsible for applying the Ministry of Defense gag orders you just referenced.
Oh, really?
Yeah, so he was involved in the application of those laws that require newspapers to not print like sensitive things. So there's a lot of weird stuff going on in the background.
So, Brigadier Jeffrey Dodds, is that who you're talking about?
I don't know.
There's so many names.
I'll get the articles from Dr. David Clark added to the show description once we're finished.
Yeah, they're really great, and there's a number of them, but it goes into it's a really cool story. The whole thing's a really cool story. I like it. But I know I was hoping you would mention this as there was one secretary who said, "Oh no, there were no D notices administered at the time." However, if you look in the Calvine report, which is what I was hoping you were going to get, because I think you're the only person I know who's read it, there is a mention of a D notice being out around the time. There was also kind of like a news flurry about the Americans' secret Aurora project going on right around the same time.
And the Gulf War started just 2 days earlier, right?
Yeah. So that stuff was on people's minds at the time, for sure. I don't know.
Yeah, it was in the popular imagination.
Yep. So we got a new piece to this puzzle of this Calvine case, but like really, there's not enough information to discern anything that I'm aware of.
How come the negatives always go missing?
I don't know.
Right.
Okay.
Dude,
Okay.
I'm like, I always want to rage about how every single picture is bad. Why is every single picture bad? Why does it look like a copy of a copy of a copy? Again, this is all about doing respect to the subject and
Yeah.
as a result, holding high standards of evidence. You know, full stop.
Respect.
Yeah, I mean, my sort of knee-jerk here, like, what makes it compelling for me to not have been a plain water reflection is just like the general geometry and framing of the objects in the picture. Like, I think it would just be like an awkward way to use a point-and-shoot camera based on sort of the topography and contortion required. I think you could do it. Like, I think you could absolutely recreate this photo on a glassy pond with a rock. But the other thing is that seeing the Harrier jet in it and sort of that seems to be a part of the photograph that's not in dispute in any meaningful sense. People seem to generally recognize that this was a plane in the picture. That to me, I'm not saying it's aliens, but I am saying that those two things in my mental model of this make it feel like it's probably not a water reflection.
Yeah, the plane looks like it's right side up in the reflection, right? So that does kind of call into question whether or not it was reflected. I thought that was the best looking one. I showed the photo to my wife really quickly. I said, "Hey, what's this?" She's like, "That's an island." But
wow, nice.
Yeah,
that's cool.
Good job, wife.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, people are picking it apart as we speak, and will continue to, especially on Metabunk. So, if there is anything to discover from that photo, I'm sure they will find it and post it. But as for me, I'm no photo analyst, but I don't need to be yet, because like I was saying, we don't have enough information in this case anyway to draw any like real conclusions.
Yeah,
That would make a good poster.
That's like instead of I want to believe, not enough.
Meant to be in restricted airspace, is that right? And that's why it was deemed like that. It couldn't have been an ad banner because of that. Is that correct?
I'm not familiar with that. It's because it's not even that's I think Nick mentioned like we don't like it's been proposed the location like I think it was the Daily Mail went out and tried to find it, but like it's not verified.
Possible that that's why it was declassified or that it was deemed extraordinary, because maybe it was an ad plane that wandered into restricted airspace and then that's why. Like,
interesting.
It also could have been like kept secret because some people did think it was compelling. I mean, like look at the Boca video. You know what I mean? I don't think any intelligence agency, like as a monolith, I think David Clark kind of wrote it this way, is too clever to not be fooled. You know, I don't think any group of people are too clever to not be fooled permanently. You know what I mean? So maybe people did think, and there was he spoke to this in his article. Maybe those people did think it was an American plane. You know, so they're like, all right, well, let's keep this quiet, because they just didn't know. It does look weird. It does look like something is hanging there in the air. So maybe they just presumed.
Well, and this is something that I think is actually pretty neat, and like we could probably dive into a little bit, is the background work that Dr. Clark has done on this. Because, you know, he's like an associate professor at Sheffield Hallam University. He's been a journalist for 30 years. He's like an excellent researcher, an academic scholar, and he's done it in, you know, the National Archives hired him to be in charge of distributing all of their most classified UFO files because he was filing he's the one who got the Condign report declassified. He's the one who had it in his hands for the first time because he filed it. And like, you know, his theory is that it's some kind of American aircraft, like a super secret aircraft. I don't think that's correct myself, but I can't say. He knows a lot more than I do, but I don't necessarily defer to that. But his reasoning, he originally said, I think this photo's a hoax. I think it's just a trash photo. And then his opinion changed as he got more declassified documents. Specifically in 2009, he got a huge trove of actual declassified internal memos showing that the Ministry of Defense took this photo very seriously. They started contacting the CIA, asking the CIA, it's like, are you guys flying your stuff in our airspace? And then the CIA says no. And then they go in, and the defense intelligence agencies sending the photo to the Pentagon. And then the Pentagon goes back to the Ministry of Defense. And they're like, did you guys build a secret aircraft using the technology sharing system that we put in with you? Because what is this thing that you guys are photographing? So, and that correspondence where the intelligence agencies are behind the scenes are like, what the heck is this thing? Why is it in our airspace? Why is it in your airspace? What is it? That's what he said convinced him that it actually was some kind of physical craft because of that context. But once again, with all these videos, like Mick West points out, like if you strip away the context and you only look at the images themselves, usually they're just like worthless, right? So it is like context does matter, but at the same time, you can't lean on the context either. So then you are left with just like, well, it's a neat story. On to the next one, I guess. Like,
right. Yeah.
Lord Ludicrous, by the way, is saying that the negatives were returned to the newspaper.
Yeah, some accounts
and they got lost in transition. Right?
And some accounts don't mention the negatives. There's a lot of murky water involved with the whole story.
One of the things I did want to chime in about is sort of the provenance of these photos or the chain of custody, right? And so and I'm going to tell a little story. So in another life, like my actual education is being a rare book and manuscript librarian. And every couple years, you read a news story about how Shakespeare's first folio will be found someplace, and it'll be found in like some ancillary library facility off Oxford or Cambridge or Yale, even though scholars have sworn up and down that there's only, say, 40 extant copies. Every now and then one will turn up. And I mention this to make a point, which is that archives in general, particularly archives that deal with special collections, so things like rich media, audio recordings, videos, artifacts of different kinds, the backlogs at these institutions for finding, locating, and indexing these materials are astounding. Like they're multi years long. And very frequently when these archives and collections were being built, there simply weren't the systems to aggregate and integrate different metadata and information about the products. So for instance, you know, the Vatican Library, I guarantee you that they regularly find things there that are extremely important to the study of religious history, but they weren't like actually indexed in a searchable database. So it happened because, you know, Father Jose from Mexico City came and visited and happened to stumble upon it while doing his PhD. And I bring that up just to kind of make a point that there's nothing sort of mysterious or strange about the provenance of these photos being kind of murky or not well understood, because this is very, very much what you see with these kinds of artifacts at all different institutions, whether governmental like Library of Congress, academic, religious, whatever. Like, this is very common.
Well, that's a very good point, I think. Have any of you watched Dr. Clark's interviews on Vinny's like Disclosure Team's channel at this point?
No.
Okay, I'll just say right now, I just recommend those 3 interviews because he actually covers a lot of this stuff, and it's a good way. Like instead of going through all the pages of his blogs, and he's got like a couple blogs scattered all over the place, Dr. Clark, and like some of them are quite old and stuff. So like he goes through stuff very effectively in the Calvine interview.
Yeah, I really liked reading his blogs earlier today to kind of like get the story better in preparation for this and the next show. But yeah, man, there's a lot of different trails and a lot of sources to click on. I had a full browser of tabs while I was done. So a video would be pretty ideal.
One of the projects, and this is just to go totally off the ranch here about the Calvine UFO, one of the things I keep coming back to that we could do is basically build a collaborative knowledge database using something like Notion or Roam, because all of us are going down our little rabbit holes, and being able to surface resources that we've found helpful, I think will help sort of weave together like pretty sophisticated narratives about different spaces and events. So that's something I'm definitely going to look into for us to start doing together.
That's a good idea.
I think what I keep coming back to about this photo too is, you know, again, not having personal opinions on it, but it's fascinating to watch emergent reality building in the community around this photo, like how it's already being mythologized, particularly because it's a photo that was taken quite a while ago. You know, we're talking 30 years.
Yeah.
And it is already and continually sparking pretty in-depth conversation. that is over pretty well trodden familiar ground, right? Like the conversations we're having now, I mean, time is a flat circle. Same conversations that have been had about these kinds of photos since time immemorial. But it's
Yeah.
really interesting sort of watching this collaborative, like I would say, mythology come together or be knit together and into the sort of collected consciousness of the UFO community.
Yeah, it is really cool. And I like the case. You know what I mean? It's a fun one. I'm into it.
It is. Yeah, there's a lot going on with it. There's a lot of ambiguity, a lot of spaces to, further research and explore.
Yeah.
It's super compelling. It's definitely one of the more compelling ones in the last few years.
Yeah.
It reminds me of that case that Valet is really into, the one over Costa Rica, I think, or Puerto Rico. Like it's got like a circular UFO, and it was. Do you know the one? It was like photographed by a aerial geography aircraft or something.
Oh, yeah, the one that Leslie Kane has on the wall of her office. Yes.
Right. I think Valet is still flogging that case, but it's on Metabunk, but it's got that same sort of similar social dynamic where people are saying, "Oh, this is it. This is definitely, a UFO, flying saucer." But it could have been like some defect in the camera or something. Like there's different explanations, but it sort of reminds me. That's sort of like a precedent for this current case, I think, in terms of like how people latch on meanings and stuff to it.
Right, it's the Rorschach test.
Yeah.
Well, and it's like there's always going to be a more plausible explanation than, it's I think if you actually contextualize the size of that one from Costa Rica, it would have to be like a kilometer wide if it's actually where the people are saying they think it is. And it's like, and then it's not in the next frame that was taken, like, 30 seconds later and stuff. So it's like, it also matches the damage from a lens chip or whatever. And it's like what are we doing here, right? Like it's like with the Calvine photo, like the entire thing is conditional on, did the people who sent it in actually hoax it or not? And it's entirely conditional on that because we have no idea. So that's all these things with the pond reflection stuff, Mick West posting showing that it's viable that could be the explanation. And it's like the thing that is really cool to me is that what we have from Dr. Clark's FOIA work is that we see that internally these agencies, these intelligence agencies, thought that it was like a legit craft. And that is wild. If
it's very compelling.
Well, within like 12 hours, we have, less than that. Within like 2 hours, we have like 10 different people presenting plausible alternatives. But then in the top levels of the intelligence, infrastructure, international, they're pointing fingers at each other, being like, "Is this yours? Is this yours?" It's like, if this is just a puddle reflection, like that is something fascinating.
Agreed.
Right.
How quickly did Mick figure out the Boca video? It was like a day or two, right? And then that video was in contention for so long until I think that most recent congressional hearing where they kind of admitted it. I mean, people are still clinging on to the Green Pyramids.
You actually just reminded me something. Mick West, his claim to fame was originally the video from that military helicopter in Costa Rica. Do you guys remember this? That looked like it was spewing like a contrail or whatever. And they studied it for 2 years, the intelligence agencies, and said like, this seems like a genuine UFO. We ruled everything out. We can't figure it out. And then Mick West, like, what was it, like in 24 hours had determined the exact plane that it was on the, incoming. And it's just like these mistakes happen at the top levels. And that needs to be factored into this consideration so that we can like take the subject seriously.
Wonderful.
I agree.
All right, gentlemen, this has been a pleasure, especially for our first conversation. We're going to wrap things up. Before we do, a quick roundtable. What do people have going on?
Starting with
classified. It's classified. I can't tell you.
I'm working a little more on the Lake Michigan 94 case, like I always am, kind of in the background. I just spoke to one of the primary on the ground witnesses a couple of days ago, and I plan to continue communicating with her. She helped me find a couple of buried resources, and I also have a collection of Michael Swords' notes, Professor Michael Swords' notes from the time of the investigation.
Nice.
Which would be interesting to go over. I detect a bit of bias in his writing. And I kind of want to highlight that in the future. I like the dude, but we see this case a little differently.
Yeah.
What about
And,
you, Campbell?
Yep, I'm in the process of trying to update my website because I've gotten a bit of feedback recently from some experiencer friends I've made saying that they dislike certain parts of it. They feel that it comes off as a little bit too confrontational or biased. And, you know, obviously I don't necessarily agree that it's biased, but I am listening to their feedback and I'm making some changes. So that's what I've been working on.
That's good.
Awesome.
I'm actually sorry, I was joking about classified, but I'm just delving deeper into the link between consciousness and UFOs.
Fantastic.
Good. Cool.
Great.
All right, we've got a couple minutes and we have a live stream on another channel.
Yes.
We're joining Unidentified Celebrity Review to discuss the Calvine UFO photo.
Yeah.
Just like to remind everyone to please like, share, and subscribe. Help our channel grow. We'll be doing these live streams. Definitely in the future, you can also find us on Twitter and our Twitter Spaces. And finally, feel free to join us in our public Discord. The link is in the video details. Thanks all, and have a nice night.